Howdy guys, it's Luke at Luke's APS. This video is going to answer a very important question, and that question is how to seal your flocks and your scatters to your terrain pieces or your miniature bases, whatever you need. There's an important question that nobody ever asks. This video is going to answer that. I'll catch you after this. I'm doing this video, one, because I get asked it, it's got to be 10, 15 times a day. I see it everywhere. I don't know whether it's Facebook or whatever thinks that he answers this question a lot, we'll just throw it at him. But I get asked it and asked it, I see it everywhere, and there's so many different responses to that question. I thought it'd be good to put it in a video. The most important question about sealing flocks that nobody ever asks is what flocks are you using? For those that don't know, I made this mistake when I started out. Flock is a generalized term for anything to do with ground cover scatter. So whether you're using sawdust flocks, foam flocks, cork flocks, static grass flocks, there's many different ones, and each one needs to be glued down and worked with differently. So this video is to show you the differences and how to fix each one efficiently and to the best it can be. The first things that you need to look for when you're looking for your flocks is what types are you going to be using. Now, if you're brand new, you're obviously not going to know. This video should hopefully fulfill that for you. I've got three down in front of me now, and these three, one is my personal favourite, which is foam flock. Now, for those that know my range, my foam flock is called the 2-in-1 range. And the reason we use foam flock is because you can sprinkle it for fine. As you can see, it's very fine and fibrous. But yeah, if you pile it up, you get a really nice scrub. So like weeded areas, it's like down mountainsides and stuff like that. But yeah, if you clump it together and throw it down, you get like a really nice clump and bushy foliage. So it does a couple of different things. Also, the benefit to foam flock is that it absorbs glue better, which means it sticks to things better. So that's the way to identify foam, is it's normally quite fluffy and it's normally very light, okay? Because obviously foam doesn't weigh much. Now, the next one that's a very popular one, especially in England, is sawdust flock. Now, the first way to identify sawdust flock is just look at it. It looks granular. You can see it's got like a nice sort of ricey appearance. However, this is very close up on a camera, so it is still pretty fine. You can get quite nice looks with sawdust, but the only problem is the fine sawdust only works as a fine ground covering. The other issues you do have with it is it doesn't tend to stick very well because it doesn't absorb as much glue as foam. However, you can still make it stick, just not as good as foam, which we'll show you in the next step. Now, I'd call this static grass. Static grass is a nylon fibre. It comes in loads of different lengths. If you're buying it from like me or any other companies that stock static grasses, you can get it in 2, 4 and 6. However, if you are just using static grass to sprinkle it on, only use 2mm. Sprinkling 4 and 6mm doesn't work. You need to be using an applicator, but we won't go into that in this video because it is the basics. But 2mm works just for sprinkling. And that's what static grass looks like. It's just a very fibrous nylon. So there you go. That's the three different flocks. Now let's get the cameras down and let's get them fixed and let's show you how to seal them. Right, so as always, we'll just start off with just some PVA glue, putting down for all three. With sawdust, put down more PVA glue. Be quite heavy-handed with the amount of glue you're putting down, so at least the glue will bond the sawdust to the base. Then with static grass, if you're using static grass, just apply it like you would any other glue. This step is easy. All you've got to do is just grab it and sprinkle it on. Obviously with foam flocks, if you're wanting like a rough texture with it or everything else, as you can see, just putting it down like this, you can get a nice sort of, oh, there's a dead moth in that. Brilliant. As you can see, putting it down like this, you can build up your texture with it. You can put it on quite thickly. You can get a nice sort of undulated look. With sawdust, just chuck it on and pile it on, and then leave that to dry after that step. With static grass, just a matter of, again, if you was doing static grass properly, I wouldn't advise doing it this way, but this is how a lot of people do the bases with static grasses, and when you've only got 2 mil, this is what you do. People put it on, they tap it off. So we can get it on while it's wet like this. We can tap it off. Obviously apply a bit more if needed. So you get like a good covering. Right, now for working with foam flocks, the first way to seal this in place is obviously you've put your glue down. Now you're wanting to lock this in place. I like to use isopropanol. If you're new to flocking or you're new to the hobby, you're probably not going to have isopropanol lying around, but any alcohol will do. Vodka, just any sort of denatured alcohol or just pure alcohol. For them that don't want to use that, you can use flow improver. Get a spray bottle of water and just put a decent amount of that in there, and then that way you get a similar effect. It's not as good as isopropanol, I've found, but it still works. It doesn't penetrate the foam as much, but for just doing your general ground scatter, and if you're just starting out, this is fine, okay? All you've got to do is just mist that very finely over the top of your flock, and what this will do is once you spray that on there, it'll hold it in place before we put the glue on. Now while it's damp like that, you could apply more flocks and keep building it up, and this is called wet working, okay? So you keep your flock wet, and then at the end you just lock it all together with a load of glue, which will show you how I make that glue now. For spray glues, everybody gets a bit, what's the ratio, what's best? Now I don't actually think there is a perfect ratio. All I can say to you is don't be afraid to thin this down too much, okay? That's how much PVA glue I put in. You can't, if you haven't got any like interior varnish or matte medium, if you've got like Winsor & Newton matte medium or gloss medium or whatever, you can use that. It's just something acrylic that'll stick far better. And with acrylics mixed in with the PVA glue, you get a really strong finish. And these are mixed to about half and half-ish. This is on turn, but doesn't matter. And then just fill the rest of that pot up with water. Now, once you've given that a good shake and a good mix up so it's totally mixed up, one thing I want to add is the bottom of your spray bottle, this bit here, the filter, okay? Cut these off. Now, there's a couple of reasons for it. One, it means that once that's in the bottle, it's not completely to the bottom, because obviously if you don't use this for a week or so, it's going to separate and sink to the bottom. So as long as you've got enough cut off, I mean, I'll probably take a little bit more off, because I filled it to about there with glue. So as long as that's shorter than where it will all sink to, it'll be fine. So then you're not going to get a mass amount of varnish and PVA in the head, so then when you spray it, it blocks it. And that's a way of keeping your nozzle from blocking. Literally just screw that on, and then we're ready to spray away. Right, so you're wanting it to mist like that. You don't want like a stream. A mist is always better because you get a nice controlled fine amount on there, and it stops your flock from blowing all over the place. I mean, that's why we wet it first with the isopropanol or the flow aid, but soak it through as in absolutely wet this to death. And then after 24 hours or so, that should be solid, which we'll come back to that tomorrow. Now, with sawdust flock, what you do once that's dry, tap off your excess. Now, if you've got enough glue on, it should have plenty on there. Now, the way we seal that is more or less the same way as last time, but just you can't wet it as much, because what happens is the sawdust, when you submerge sawdust, it sort of separates from the base and floats to the top, and then when you come to actually see whether it's dry, you touch it and it just all sort of falls off. You can't wet it, so I don't like to pre-wet or wet work with sawdust. Right, so with your static grass, it should be pretty well stuck. There's not a lot you can actually do with static grass. If you put loads of spray glue on there, the problem you have is it sort of flattens it down, it sort of destroys it. The way when that works, when you can layer the grass up, is when you're working with more than one length of static grass and using an applicator. If you want to see a video on how to static grass, watch the video up on the top corner now, and that'll show you in-depth guides to static grass. But if you're just using 2mm and sprinkling it on, I would not advise spraying this with watered down PVA glue because it will flatten it and make it look all crap. What you need to do is just spray it with a matte varnish. Just give it a decent coat, couple of sprays like that, and that's more than enough. The other thing with static grass that you might not be able to tell on camera, it's got a bit of a sheen because it's nylon. So using a matte varnish gets rid of that sheen and makes it look nice and matte. All right, guys, so once these are completely dry, we'll bring it back, we'll test how durable they are, and then we'll wrap it up. So guys, it's the next day, they're all completely dry. This is the foam flock, this is the sawdust flock, and this is the static grass. So for firmness test, let's give them a quick rub. That's pretty on there. The only bits that are coming off are the coarse bits. That, you know, if you'd sprayed that again with some more glue, you get that down. But the main covering is on there, and that's not coming off. But what you get with foam flock is you get that sort of nice natural undulation, because obviously there's quite a lot of texture and there's quite a lot of you can build it up, where you can't really do that with sawdust as such. I mean, you can, but you have to layer it up and wait for it to dry in between each one. But with this, you get that nice undulation that looks a lot more natural, and that's why I prefer foam flock. Now, moving on to sawdust, let's do the test to see how strong it is. And as you can see, it's the base coat's on there, but over time that's gonna rub off. Okay, it's just not as strong. And I mean, again, just to prove, the foam is just so much stronger compared. You get hardly any off, whereas with the sawdust, you get loads off. Static grass, however, is as firm as foam, sealing it that way, but the only difference you do get when you're rubbing it is it flattens down and you lose the height of the grass. I've rubbed it a little bit, and as you can see, it still looks all right. I mean, 2mm static grass always looks okay on its own anyway. You don't always have to use an app with 2. It does look a lot nicer with 2, but you can get away with just sprinkling it. But 4 and 6mm, don't apply it like this at all, because it just looks a mess. With the sawdust up close, as you can see, it still looks okay after that severe rubbing, but obviously over time that's going to become less and less and less, to the point where it looks like it's patchy and falling off. The only way to combat that with sawdust is, once it's completely dry, is paint on thick PVA glue over the top, and you can apply this a couple of times. The problem is you do lose some, it loses its colour, it goes a lot darker, and it's still not as strong. I've tried all sorts to try and make sawdust stick as hard as foam or static grass, and I just can't. It's just the nature of the product. So guys, I hope that helps. This is a video, you know, obviously for new people. Any veterans that have learned something from this, let me know in the comments below. Me, when I started out, all the flocks were the same thing to me, and the more I've worked with them, I mean, now to the point where I actually sell them with manufactured products and everything else, I've learned an awful lot about them. Sawdust has its place, okay? I personally like foam over any other flock, even static, but the combination of all three together is amazing, okay? Don't cancel anyone out. I don't have a proper favourite, but for general scatter, I use foam. One, because it's durable for wargaming. It looks a lot more natural. It is a bit more expensive, but it lasts longer, as in on your finished product. So that's why I use it. Sawdust is great for added textures and under woods and bits and pieces like that. Wherever you want some texture, it's great for that. And static grass, I like to accent with it, but if you were doing a diorama, I'd prefer using static grass over flock, depending on what scale it is. Okay, so, but again, another video. I hope that covers everything that you wanted to know. I hope that covers how to seal flock and how strongly it does seal it. If you want to support me, check out all my products below, guys. There's all the flocks seen in here, obviously in all different colours. We have sealant glues, we have PVAs, we have fast drying basing glues that are all designed for its purpose. Okay, and they're done at affordable prices. Thanks for watching, thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you on Friday for a funny and interesting video. Can't wait for this one. I'll see you then. Love, love, love.